I think we're live. Welcome everyone to our live rewatch recap Q&A of today's banding. We're going to be joined in just a few minutes with our bander, Dr. Zika Glucks, from the Santa Cruz Predatory Bird Research Group. And I am Sean Peterson. I'm a recent graduate of UC Berkeley, and I am a postdoctoral researcher at the SUNY School of Environmental Science and Forestry.
Hi, and I'm Lynn Schofield, and I'm a biologist for the Institute for Bird Populations. And yeah, I'm excited that we will be joined by the bander herself here in the video. But until then, we can talk a little bit about what we're seeing on screen here.
I guess maybe we should start with bird. Why do people ban birds?
Well, there are a lot of reasons for this. It's actually sort of a big question, really. So as you can see earlier in the video, Zika had a string of bands that she was taking out. All right, so I'm going to narrate first, and then what is going through the chicks' minds.
Maybe it's the same thing as an alien abduction kind of thing.
Yeah, falcons and a lot of other birds of prey, once they are no longer able to see and have the visual input, tend to calm down a good deal, though. So that is why the first step is to get something to cover the eyes to help keep the chick relatively calm. And then you can see that Zika has also given the chick a bandana that she can hold on to. All right, and here we have Zika Glucks here to join us, bander. And so to start with, we were going to narrate the banding and then take questions as we go. So perhaps we can give the narration part to you, Zika.
Sure thing. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, so looks like you guys probably got a little started already, but today I had Natalie Tan Torres up helping me out with some chick handling. And basically she cradles the chick in a very sort of natural position for the chicks. You've probably seen them just laying flat out in the nest box a lot lately. That's supine position that they feel pretty comfortable in. And if we visually kind of isolate them as well, they get really calm and relaxed. And so that allows us to go through the banding process with as little stress as possible. And yeah, so the first step for banding any bird is sizing the leg. So that's what I'm doing there with that leg gauge. The interesting thing with peregrines is that males and females take completely different band sizes. There's no overlap. So that's actually when we can really tell if we're holding a male or a female chick, is after we take that leg band size. And then we place 2 bands on the chicks, one on each leg. One of them is a USGS silver band, and that has basically like the social security number for every bird that's ever banded anywhere in the US. So it's many digits long, something you can't read from a distance. So when you get recoveries on those bands, it's because the bird is in hand, which means it's either deceased or injured or ill. So those are very important. But we also put on a visual ID band with the hopes of getting some more encounters of the band when the bird's alive and well. Because these black VID bands that you'll see in a moment have a larger alphanumeric code that you can read if you zoom into photos or if you have a high-powered scope. You can see that at a distance. So we get a lot of great encounters from those bands. And that's actually how we found out that Laurentium, one of the young from a couple years ago, is a breeder in the Bay Area now, was from that black VID band. So yeah, we want to
Right.
make sure these, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to bring up a couple questions, but maybe I'll let you continue with the narration.
Well, I was just going to say that you saw me spinning the band around. That was just because these bands, they stay with these birds for the rest of their lives. So we really want to make sure that they fit them well. And that's one of the ways that we check. We make sure they spin freely on the leg, that they can't slip up or down the leg too far, and they're just going to stay in place and stay comfortable. But I'm happy to take questions.
All right. So there's just a couple sort of questions about when you do plan the banding process, do you have goals as far as, how fast are you trying to go? Are there contingency plans in place? What sort of training do you need to do this kind of thing?
Yeah, so there's a lot of questions in there. First things first is yes, if the chicks are not, responding well to the stress of banding, or I guess I should back up. If the conditions aren't good for banding, say it's a rainy day or a really hot day, and it might be too stressful to put them through a handling event, we would not enter a nest at that point, just because we want them to be able to recover, the parents to be able to recover, because they are also up there defending the nest while we're there. So that's the first thing. It was a nice cool morning, so it was a great day for banding. If the chicks are showing any sign of distress or not doing well with handling, we would do an expedited banding process where we just place the bands on the bird. We don't take any other measurements or samples, and we just place them back in the nest and get out of there as soon as possible. Very rarely, this has never actually happened for me during a nest entry, but if you were to find an injured chick, we could potentially evacuate that chick from the nest, bring it to someone who's able to rehab a falcon from that age. But honestly, the best place for a falcon to learn how to be a wild falcon is out in the wild with their parents. And so that's a very, that would be a very extreme situation when we would decide to do that. For the most part, we just go in, do our work, go out, and the goal, is always to take as little time as possible. It seems like most nest entries are, around 30 minutes long, where we're actually at the nest. We aim for wanting the parents to be kind of from the start of their alarming to the end of their, kind of nest defense stuff to be about an hour. Today was great. The parents stopped doing their stooping and vocalizing as soon as we left. So it's always really nice to see that.
Yeah, we saw on the cam Annie return to the balcony as if nothing happened within 5 minutes of their departure.
That's what you hope for, yeah. Sometimes their adrenaline gets up and they're still kind of going for a little while after we leave. And so we usually just watch and make sure they calm down.
Zeke, do you get the sense that birds, like, Annie has done this, I guess, now 6 times. Do they get used to it?
I don't know. I feel like they all just have different personalities and different intensities of nest defense. There are certainly some females, and I would even put Annie in that realm, that they're going to defend the nest as intensely and viciously every time. And we know that going in, that this is a highly defensive female, and we're prepared for that. And then there's some nests where the female does not mind our presence and has even remained in the nest during banding. So it's very bird to bird, and I don't think it changes that much year to year, I guess, within birds.
All right. So here's a question. We get this question a lot every time we talk about banding, but why aren't you wearing any kind of even thin gloves to protect yourselves or the birds?
Yeah, so based on my raptor handling training, I was actually taught that and handling even full-grown raptors, that it's more dangerous for the birds if you're wearing gloves, because you don't have as much dexterity, you don't have as much sensitivity to understand what their legs are and where they are, and we're stronger than them, so we can easily injure them with our hand strength. So it's actually you can just be more sensitive to their needs when you're not wearing gloves, even though it's somewhat more protective to you to wear them, especially with chicks that have much more fragile legs, less musculature. You really don't want to have anything that's making you less sensitive to where those legs are positioned. I don't know if you all remember the beginning of COVID, I did try, just for like zoonotic potential transfer, to try to use like very clean techniques. And this was the first nest actually that I tried to wear just normal latex gloves at, but that doesn't work with raptor chicks. They got shredded within the first minute of me trying to handle them. So what we do now is we just sanitize our hands before and after handling the chicks at each
All
nest.
right.
So on screen, we see you clipping a feather right now. What are you taking that data for?
Yeah, so for one, this is for a study that we're collaborating with Nevada Wildlife Department scientists on, and he's looking at metals in birds of prey, specifically mercury. And we are basically an important outgroup for them because we know we're in a high mercury area, being so close to the Bay Area where there's a lot of mercury contamination in the food chain, a lot of which is from historic gold mining, interestingly, since that was a byproduct from mining. But yeah, so basically we take a clipping from the fourth primary of one chick in each nest, since it's pretty representative of what they're all eating, and it lets us know kind of where they stand on the range of mercury contamination around the bay. You also see me collecting right now some growing covert feathers or back feathers. They're small little pin feathers that are located right on the top of the back. And those, by plucking them, we're able to actually get some kind of pulp and tissue that has good DNA in it that we can use to do genetic studies with these birds. And I'm really excited to hopefully get some of that data soon so we can start seeing how related our Bay Area peregrine falcons are, and maybe even go down to the level of understanding some of this extra pair paternity stuff we've been talking about specifically at this nest. So I'm very curious about this nest's genetic results for this year.
Everyone is very
People are
curious about if all of the chicks are Grinnells, or there's an Alden chick in there too, or what the situation is.
Exactly. Yeah, and the nice thing about that, the reason I think we might be able to get at that is because we have data from these chicks from previous years where we know Grinnell was the male on territory, so we might be able to tease that out.
All right, so someone was just curious about during that little piece where you were just about to take the feather, you were counting the feathers before taking the sample. What were you counting them for?
So just for consistency, scientifically, we take the same feather every time. But also we want to be sure we're taking one of the inner primaries. So I count back from primary 10, which is the outermost leading edge primary, and work my way back to 4. We don't want to take those outer primaries because they're more important for agility and moving around in the air. So as these guys are learning, just if there's any chance we were affecting that, we wanted to limit that by taking a lower primary.
All right, and so there is the first chick all fully banded, process over.
Yeah, that was the first time she made a noise right there. She's very quiet the whole time.
Yeah, is there a lot of variation in the chicks as well then about how they react to banding too? Because this one, the female was very quiet and the male was really, really loud in this case.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a difference. There's usually sometimes they're all a chorus together. You know, they set each other off and they're all going off the whole time. Sometimes there's the protectors of the other chicks that are going off the whole time while the others are sort of hiding behind them or are more calm. And just from my own observation, it seemed in the past that the females were generally more vocal than the males, or more kind of perturbed by us handling their siblings. But this case, it was the opposite. It was the male that started right away as soon as we picked up the female and just kind of kept going throughout until we sort of cover him up. As you can see here, he sort of quiets down when he has his head covered with the bandana.
And then about the feather samples again, and you were only clipping a very end of the feathers, but
yes,
do feathers, grow back when, like the covert feather, you did take the whole feather.
Yeah.
How soon does that kind of thing grow back?
So they will grow back at sort of a later timeline than the other feathers. When feathers are pulled, it will elicit another feather to grow after that. But it will take more time for that covert to grow, and then it's other feathers that are growing already. Luckily with the coverts too, taking 3 coverts, they're still going to have a nice smooth aerodynamic, insulating back with all the feathers that are left. So they shouldn't be impacted flight wise or thermoregulation wise from those small feathers being plucked. We wouldn't want to pluck a flight feather because that could hamper their ability to live and hunt. But those clip feathers, that feather will be clipped until, and it's just about, a centimeter and a half that we take. That's clipped until they molt next spring when they start to molt into their adult plumage. So that is when they'll replace that primary forefeather.
All right. So someone was wondering, this came up a little earlier, but so how and when do you determine the sex of each chick?
Yeah, so we have a pretty good idea as soon as we find the band size. So males take a size 6 band, females take a size 7A band, very rarely a 7B, which is a larger band than the 6. Females are about 30% larger than the males, and there's no overlap as far as their body size goes. So they're really easy species to sex, even at this age in the nest. We also, as a backup, and you might see me do this in a moment, take a tarsus length, which gives us another just sort of confirmation that we're looking at a female or a male chick at this age, because the female tarsus, which is the segment of leg just above their talons, their foot, that is clearly larger than the male's tarsus length.
So I should mention what we're seeing right now on screen. Zika is putting on colored electrical tape over the silver band, and this is done because in California the black band with the big numbers that you can see really well, all of them are black. The visual bands. In other places and with other species, often you get different colors. And so it doesn't make it super easy to tell individuals apart when they're learning to fly and everything. So Zika puts a colored tape on the silver band so we can really easily tell the individuals apart as they're kind of learning to fly. And it's just a little bit of kind of a bonus thing for us.
Yeah, and I was going to make a quick comment because Zika sort of mentioned that the males are taking a size 6 band and the females are taking the size 7 bands. And just for context, bird bands come in sizes for pretty much anything from, hummingbirds to eagles. And so a warbler would be taking a 0 or a 0A. And then an eagle would be taking a 9. And then, so there's everything in between there. Hummingbirds get special kinds of bands. And then some of the largest birds, like swans, actually have neck rings for studies. So just to put context there. Now, here's a very serious scientific question posed to us. Just how soft are these chicks?
I'd say they're exactly as soft as they look. I mean, their down is very, very soft, and you can see it just blows in the wind. Like, it's super light. There's not a really, rigid rachis or anything. It's just this floofy feather that blows in the wind, and they're super, super soft. And at this age, they're just starting to get some pin feathers in, like the feathers we collect from the back, so you can feel those a little bit in some places, but for the most part they're just balls of fluff right now. Great question.
I know. And I mean, it's, important to know that it's fluffy. That's keeping them insulated.
What's kind of interesting is, having we've all handled a lot of different types of birds, and the amount of fluffiness that a bird has is really highly variable. Like there's some species, like the American woodcock or the dipper, are like they're the fluffiest things that you could ever imagine. It's like holding a little tiny pillow in your hand.
Yeah, but it's ecologically important. A dipper is very fluffy because they spend most of their time in cold creeks, even in the winter, cold flowing water. Whereas then toucans, they don't have down feathers at all. So
They just go from naked to feathered.
Yep.
Wow, that's
Yep.
amazing.
All right, and someone was just curious. Did you consider taking the unhatched egg? Do you take any of that kind of stuff from the nest if you encounter stuff in the nest?
Sometimes out of curiosity, we'll look at some prey remains, things like that we find. If we find other bands from banded birds, we'll usually collect those as well to follow up with the folks that banded those birds. But as far as eggs go, we don't have any active research going on with eggs, and so we do not collect them from the nest. And for the most part, aside from us watching them on the cams and wondering about them, they don't really impact the bird's breeding process or anything like that. Although we did see Annie try to incubate for a second recently. Usually they just become part of the sort of detritus of the nest naturally.
Yeah, and there's been a couple questions just about, early on you're walking in, you're talking amongst each other, you're whispering. How does this, have any sort of effect on the chicks? Like, does your talking make any difference in any way?
Yeah, I mean, in general, sorry, I like to keep a pretty calm environment around the nest. No quick movements or loud noises, just to keep the chicks calm. They at this age is not too much of an issue, but certainly as they get to the older range of when we'll do a nest entry, say closer to 4 weeks old, they're a little more mobile, and so you want to be really careful as you approach that you don't startle them in any way so they don't put themselves in danger. So that's another reason we go slow and quietly to the nest, ideally.
So this, for people who don't know, this is Annie's 15th chick, 14th and 15th chicks, and this is her fourth female chick and 4th female and 11th male. So the question is having an equal split of males and females common, or a larger nest likely to have more of one than another? We have a bit of a sex skew at this nest. Is that common in the Bay Area or in general?
I'd have to look at the data more carefully to answer that question. Maybe that would be an interesting research question. What I've seen over time is it usually tends to even out, but I know we've talked about how this nest has a lot more males and why that could be. But yeah, usually it's year to year, we'll get these odd years throughout the Bay where we'll have more males or more females, and it'll really impact like our band ordering planning, because we'll realize, oh my gosh, we used up all of our male bands, didn't expect that. But then it'll swing back in another year, and so it does seem to even out over time. But this is just my recollection and not actually looking at the data, so it'd be interesting to look at that.
All right. Yeah, and then just, worth noting that sex is determined in birds chromosomally, similar to how it is in mammals. So, if you have 2 of the same, you end up a male. If you have 1 of each, you end up with a female. So in theory, it should be 50-50, but for certain species, one is more likely to hatch than another if the parent's in a certain physiological condition. But I don't know of that necessarily being a thing in raptors. I've not
Yeah,
seen
we've seen,
research indicating a clear pattern.
right. I've seen studies that go both ways with raptors,
Mhm.
where in times of stress they'll favor male or female offspring. Um, but I can't see a clear consensus on that in the literature.
Yeah, just start over the footage.
All right. Yeah, we finished the rewatch. So you can see based on the length of time this had been live, it was a 25 minutes start to finish. And then someone really, has an important question. And so important to answer. Have parent birds ever abandoned a nest after banding? Or do they just come away feeling like they did their job protecting the nest after you leave?
Great question. Yeah, so that's another reason, or the reason we're able to do this work is because it's the latter. So once there are chicks in the nest, once there are eggs in the nest, really, the parents are committed to this breeding effort in this location. They're definitely, the earlier on, the more likely they are to abandon the nest. So if they have not laid eggs yet, and they're getting disturbed frequently, they could abandon that nest. Potentially early in the laying cycle, they might also consider that because they are able to reclutch so easily. But once they're chicks, they are committed. And so we have never seen in the whole course of this program from back into the 70s any kind of nest abandonment. And in fact, that's also why they are such great species for fostering chicks into the nest, because they always accept chicks. It really is a strong kind of instinctual urge that they have to care for chicks. And so luckily they don't do any abandonment at this stage.
I think we should follow up on that because a lot of people don't know the history of peregrine falcons super well. So, what do you mean about by fostering chicks, and how was that used for peregrine falcons?
Yeah, so for folks who don't know, peregrine falcons went through a severe bottleneck in the mid 20th century from a reproductive toxin DDT, and that was causing their eggshells to thin and their eggs to break. And so they had close to a zero reproductive rate for many years, and that's how the population went into such a steep decline. And so there was a lot of different types of techniques used to bring their numbers back up. A lot of it included captive breeding, so raising chicks in captivity and then bringing them back out to the wild. And in the few wild nests that remained, they would actually take the eggs from the nest, replace them with dummy eggs so that they could incubate them in captivity. This would allow the egg to be able to be incubated without being crushed by the parents because they still had very thin eggshells. And then once those chicks hatched, they could return them to the nest, remove the dummy eggs, and the parents would just go, "Oh, all my eggs have hatched. Time for me to raise these young." And that was called fostering. There was also some really interesting stuff like cross fostering going on, where they put peregrine falcons into other species nests, like prairie falcon nests, just added an extra peregrine falcon chick in there so that they could get a nice wild upbringing from prairie falcons. And that worked pretty well also.
Yeah, and now at this point, the prairie falcon is the less abundant of the two species, which is sort of an odd change. All right, here's a good question. So the chicks don't appear to be fully grown. Is there any room in the band for additional growth?
So the answer is no, because at this age, while they don't appear to be fully grown, their legs are at the size they will always be. And that's why we're able to band them at this stage. We want to band them before they're, once all the growing is done, because what if we're wrong, right? And we think the span's going to fit and then it's too tight later. Well, we're out of luck. We can't change that band. So we wait until they're 3 weeks old, just expressly for that reason. They still have a little bit of growing to do, but interestingly enough, they're mostly fully grown at this stage. They just don't have those feathers that we're used to that make them look much bigger, make their wings look much longer, their heads look bigger, and their tails look longer. So they're actually getting pretty close to full size body-wise at this point, too.
All right, so here's a question I actually am curious about from you too, Zika. What is the most difficult place or nest you have had to do banding?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So there are nests where we band on the end of a rope. So we use ropes to access the nest. And so we're basically either kind of wedged into a nest cavity or hanging from a rope while we work with the chicks. So that can be a little challenging from time to time. If it's ever a place where it's unsafe to do that, we'll usually take the chicks down to another location or up to another location where we can band them on with a little more area around. But I'd say actually one of the more difficult things besides just being on the rope is when you're more exposed to the parents while you're banding. So the nice thing about the campanile is that we right now where we're sitting, that you can see on the screen, there's a nice banister that the cam is actually attached to that is higher than our heads. And that kind of keeps the parents from making contact with us while we are doing our work and working with the chicks. It can be difficult when you have a parent that has really easy access to hitting you in the head and the shoulder while you're trying to do this work if you're very exposed. And I think one of the most exposed sites I've ever banded at for that purpose was the Moss Landing smokestacks, because you're on a cylinder and they just can get you from every direction while you're climbing up it. So that's probably been the most difficult access for me in the past.
All right, and so then, by extension, what were Annie and Alden doing during this banding?
They were doing some great nest defense. So Alden showed up first and actually was stooping on us when we first walked out. He was the first to arrive. And then once Annie showed up, she took on that role, doing the fast dives past us and vocalizing, while Alden stayed higher up, circling and vocalizing, kind of backup mode, which is usually what we see, the females being more in the thick of things and the males kind of supporting from a more distant point.
All right.
Yeah, so the whole time we were there, they were defending the nest.
And someone had a question, I think I lost it, about whether this differed from how Grinnell defended the nest. And I think all the times that we had Annie and Grinnell was circling at a bit more of a distance than it seems like Alden was.
So that's more usual, and that's what I remember as well. So I think the reason Alden showed a little more close nest defense was just because he got there first and someone had to do it, but yeah, generally that's what we see is the female interacting with us more and the male kind of alerting her and just holding sentry somewhere nearby.
All right, and now this is an early question and we kind of missed getting to this, but it's sort of maybe the most important context here. What data and information are we getting from the banding? Why is it necessary to continue?
Yeah, so this, what we get from the bands, it's sort of twofold at this point. First, there's just the most basic kind of old-fashioned band data that you get, which is where do they go, how long do they live, and sometimes how do they die. So understanding potential mortality factors, and just how these birds are doing over the course of their life. But because in our study, we seem to get a lot of birds returning to our study area to breed, we're also getting a lot of information kind of through the lineage and productivity, how they contribute to this subpopulation when they become breeders themselves. And then even more fine-tuned kind of movement and dispersal data from those VID bands. The reason when I took over this project, I really wanted to continue the banding aspect of this program is in part because it has been going on since the early 90s in the Bay Area, since they first reestablished in this area. And so we already had a really complete long-term monitoring data set, which is really rare to have over decades of time. Just a similar input or input over many years, trying to follow and track these birds. And so with each year that we continue to study, that data becomes more valuable as you kind of add it to the whole. Specifically with raptors, it's really hard to get large data sets too from studying them, because they're distributed a lot more patchily on the landscape, and far apart, I should say. So by putting this data together over years, you can get a lot more power, and we're looking at, how these birds are doing, what's their reproduction like, what kind of mortality factors are we seeing. So yeah, as long as we're able to, we plan to continue to band and collect samples from this population.
Yeah, because going into band also then gives you that ability to take the samples for possible genetic tests, the study of heavy metals in birds. So
that was important to me too. If we're going to be going in and handling these birds, we need to get as much quality data as we can that actually could impact our understanding of the species, how they're doing, and potential conservation relevant information for these birds. So we're really open to collaborating with other researchers to help make these kinds of samples available to them as well, to just increase the value of what we're doing.
And I feel like, we're spending a lot of time on this question, and I think that's good because it's a really important question. But I wanted to stress that this is one of the questions that is very we have our visitor showing up to say hi. This is an important question for biologists, because one of the things that we really discuss a lot and talk with people a lot about is how to minimize any effect on the animals that we're studying. Not only for their health and safety and everything, but also for the nature of the study. We don't want to be influencing a wild population and making inferences that are invalid because we're altering the behaviors by being there. And it takes a lot of permitting and planning and everything to do this kind of work. So, you see, we're in and out here at 25 minutes, but Zika has put in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours to make sure that this work happens, and worked with a lot of people to make sure it happens in an ethically good way for not only us, but for the birds.
Thanks, John. Yeah, that's really important. I think I just wanted to add that, as it seems like, the threats that a lot of these birds are facing more and more are these sort of long-term trend changes, like things like climate change, things like habitat change over time. And so being able to look at data over that scale over long periods of time becomes more and more valuable.
All right, so we had a question earlier, and I think I lost it. Oh, here it is. So it's basically about the chicks' parents, the father of the chicks, and we know, or we're reasonably certain, that one is Grinnell's and the other one we're not sure. Can you speak to why, or how Peregrine falcons kind of parentage works? How quick does it happen where we might actually have an Alden chick, despite Grinnell having been the territorial male until the day the third egg was supposed to be laid?
Right. So it does take, several days for an egg to be formed in the oviduct. And come down through and be laid. And so you need to have some of that, male donated genetic material up there before the egg starts to get those layers of albumin and then shell and then ultimately be laid. So there is sort of a time requirement there before laying that, it's kind of fuzzy because of what happened at this nest, whether or not Alden was here in time to be one of those sperm donors. However, I don't know, in my narrative of this story, Annie was doing some weird stuff too before all this happened, going off in odd places. We didn't usually see her fly, things like that. Perhaps it's possible she and Alden had been acquainted before he showed up as the new Campanile male. So I'm not going to put anything past him at this point. And I'm hoping that we will be able to glean some information on paternity from these chicks, since we do have so many years of well, at least 1 year of genetic data where we know Grinnell was the male on territory. So I'm really hoping that we'll have some answers for you guys about that, about this year's dad.
All right. Has this one come up yet, Sean?
No.
All right. This is the kind of question I love. What's your most memorable moment banding in a nest?
Whew, okay. Gosh. I mean, always the first nest entry is really kind of etched in my mind. The first time I went to help band young was at the PG&E building in San Francisco. And I did what you did, Sean, when you were up there last time. I kind of held the chicks for Glenn Stewart while he banded, and just got to just revel in the beauty of these birds and the amazingness that we got to see them in their nesting habitat. I guess one of the more memorable nest entries I haven't gotten to do since was there was this one that was on a channel marker in the bay, and we took a boat to this nest site. That was really interesting. Getting to see these young in the middle of the bay that somehow just fledged to land and made it work. So that was a particularly memorable one. 2 girls, I believe.
All right, we're changing the stream a little bit quickly because we saw that people are mentioning that there's some feeding going on, and that
Nice.
a long-legged water bird had come in. So whoa, that's very long-legged water bird.
Oh my gosh.
Is it like a curlew? Well, let's go back to here. We'll share this. We'll go back to when it arrived.
I think it's being shared. Let's see.
Oh yeah, is the screen shared right now? We can.
Holy cow.
Oh, it's stilt, I believe.
No, it still have red legs.
Oh, you're right.
Is it
an avocet? It's got the black and white. I'm gonna say avocet. Yeah.
Oh yeah, those have gray legs, looks like. Wow.
I think I'll grab my trusty Sibley Guide to Birds, which is sitting right behind us. But
Our Sibley Guide to Prey Identification.
yes. All right. Well, let's screen this.
That's great because they hadn't gotten breakfast yet, right?
They actually had a really small breakfast about an hour after you guys left. Annie actually brought a live lesser goldfinch into the nest, and then it was quickly unalived. So they had a small one, and now here's I think their first big meal.
All right.
What do we think, Avocet?
Yep, avocet definitely looks like the bird in question.
We are. What's that?
All right, we'll go back to live.
We are. I've just been blown away by Alden's hunting habits being so diametrically different from Grinnell's. The amount of water birds we have seen this year is just unbelievable. Do you like see these patterns at nests of like, this nest is hunting only pigeon, this nest is hunting only like, shorebirds, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so we do see that, I would say, and so we're not as lucky to have this awesome kind of cam at each nest. So we don't get to see the detail that you guys see at all the nests. But certainly when you look at prey remains at different nests, you see a definite differences between the nests. Certainly, pigeons form a large part of most urban nest diets, even some wildland diets, either rock or banded pigeons or band-tailed pigeons, sorry. And we do also see, when they're near the coast, more of these kind of water birds. One nest that was right on the coast was filled with kind of like blackbird feathers. So that certainly one of them was kind of specializing in that terrestrial bird, whereas we've seen the female get a lot of shorebirds. So that was really strange to see all of these black feathers in the nest. And it makes sense for me, just, thinking about Alden specifically, that he would have some strategies that he kind of falls back on with his injury. I'm sure this is something he's developed over time and works really well for him, and that's why he's been able to succeed with his bum foot. So it really makes sense that he might have even more pronounced kind of specialization in what species he's getting.
Okay, so I actually have no idea. Will they eat these legs?
I think the legs they might be there for a little bit. Typically, in much of the prey they bring back, they will eat the legs, and they'll just eat them whole and then break them down in their crop and then in their stomach. But with really long legs, we've seen like stilt legs in the nest before that they didn't eat. And one time they brought back a sharp-shinned hawk, but I think they ate the sharp-shinned hawk's long legs. I doubt they'll eat the avocet legs, but I don't know. Maybe they'll give it a try.
Let's see.
There's the Alcatraz one.
Oh yeah, someone was curious. So have you banded any of Larry's Alcatraz broods?
Well, I have not. I'll get to that in a second, why not? But we do know, I'll just say that she did fledge young this year. Just a few days ago, I got word from the Alcatraz biologists that they have fledged peregrines on the island, which is great.
Wonderful.
Ooh.
Yeah,
All
I don't
right.
know how many, but there is at least 2 fledges. And we have not banded there, despite we have permits to band there now. Ever since we learned she moved there, we pursued that. But the site that they've chosen the last couple years happens to be right directly above a cormorant nesting colony. And a big part of what the biologists on the island are doing are protecting seabird nesting colonies from disturbance. And it turns out cormorants are very, very sensitive to nest disturbance, to the point that a single, flushing of the parents can lead to a 0 reproductive rate, because they incubate with the eggs on their feet. And if they take off from the nest, they often toss the eggs out of the nest. So they're really, really sensitive to any kind of disturbance that would cause them to flush. So a nest entry is one of those disturbances that is just a little too much for them to handle. And unfortunately, their nesting season really overlaps with the peregrine nesting season. So as long as the peregrines are nesting there, it's pretty unlikely, and the cormorants, it's pretty unlikely that we will band the young there, just out of concern for the cormorants. But we do still hope to find ways to monitor using cameras and other tools where we can kind of follow how she's doing.
So how many nests do you think there are in the Bay Area that you do not band?
Yeah, so we know we only band, I'd say, maybe 20 to 25% of the nests that we monitor. And a big part of that is access, if we can safely access the nest. Another part of that is if we can get data on the right kind of, and legally access the nest. Some places folks don't want us to access. but yeah, and get enough data to understand what's going on. And so if it's a really hard nest to observe, we're not going to be able to know when it's safe, when the birds are big enough, but still young enough that we can access that nest safely. So that's another reason we won't. So we're just banding on a subset of these nests, but we still try to collect productivity data from as many nests as possible. So at this point, I believe we're up to somewhere like 40 to 50 nests that we monitor in the Bay Area and sort of northern Monterey Bay area. And I'm sure within that we're missing some amount of nests that we just haven't discovered yet that are just so remote. And we haven't found them yet, or haven't heard about them. And so I would guess that there's probably at least 60 nests in our area, in our study area at this time.
Yeah. So, and this actually I was wondering about that myself, because we had, a total of 12 unknown falcons over the course of this season. 12?
I think it was 12, yeah.
And only one of them had a band. So if you're banding about 25% of the Bay Area nests, that means that a lot of those individuals we were seeing were not local to the Bay Area,
Right, or came from one of the nests we don't ban. So there are some
sure, but that was less than 10%, like what, 8% of the birds we saw banded,
right.
Relative to your 25%.
Right. So
that,
it is possible.
Yeah, that indicates some amount.
Yeah.
Because I have had that question before, like, are these all Bay Area birds? And most likely not.
Yeah, and I would say too, like there's some years where we have like low banding years, maybe we didn't get that many chicks in the nest that we banded that year. But then the chicks in the other nest we monitored or the parents in the other nest we monitored did great and fledged 4 chicks per nest. So sometimes we won't necessarily band like 25% of the chicks, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Just to take that logically further down the line. But yeah, 12-foot floaters unbanded, there could definitely be some that have moved in from other zones.
Yeah. All right. And this question came up a couple times. So what tools were you bringing with you for the banding? And where do you get these tools? Because they're clearly not the sort of thing you pick up at the usual hardware store for a couple of the things you have.
Yes, for a couple. There's some that you can get at the hardware store, thankfully, because they're a little easier to get and usually a little cheaper. But yeah, we do have some specialized bird banding tools that we buy from a company called Avenet, that is a company run by avian researchers and standardized for banding birds in the US. And so that's where we get things like our leg gauges, specialized banding pliers. We actually don't need to use those for our kinds of bands, but you can get those from there. And also we use for our VID bands, there's one company that makes these VID bands for peregrine falcons all over the place. And they have a whole system for who gets what color and who gets what series. And so everyone orders from them. And then we just affix them with a normal rivet gun with steel rivets. So a lot of it is just familiar tools. Oh, and the other thing we get from Avenet is the calipers that we use to measure tarsus length. So those are just sort of a standardized measuring tool for morphometrics for birds, or at least for some of them.
So pretty much you're entering, so tools you have the leg gauge you mentioned, and that's what you're using to measure the leg for the right band size. And that's got little holes that are, the exact size of the band, so you know how it would fit. And then you have pliers that you're using to open the bands and, close the bands, the rivet gun for the black bands, calipers for measuring things like tarsus and feathers. Yeah, so that's pretty much the tool set, I think.
That's the basics. We also have some feather collection, sampling tools, but that's all just what we do.
Oh, right.
So this is a couple of questions about nests also in the area. Do you band the UC Davis chicks, or does someone else?
We do now. They weren't banded for a few years after the nest was established. But once it was apparent that they were sticking around and they were on cam, so it's such an easily accessible nest, I decided to add them to our study area last year. It was just a little too far into the Central Valley. I wasn't sure if we should expand that far, but because also the male is a banded male from one of our other study sites, I figured finally it's time to incorporate them. So last year and this year we did band the young there. This year they had 2 boys.
Nice. And then you may not want to weigh in on this very much, but curious if you can say much about the old PG&E nest in San Francisco and the new nest.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So yeah, unfortunately, the birds on the old PG&E nest where we had our other nest cam, they're due to some construction and later in the year, the decision was made to exclude the peregrines from that nest before the breeding season this year. So we were really curious to see if they would just find another spot on the building to nest, or B, if they would move somewhere else. And they did actually find another building in the area where they had nested in several years past. So they clearly knew about it. They moved right over there and raised 4 young. All of them fledged recently. One of them unfortunately didn't make it past her first couple of days of fledging due to a collision, which is a really common mortality factor specifically for that nest in downtown San Francisco. There's just a lot of sheer buildings with reflective glass that are really dangerous to early fledglings. But we still have 3 out there doing well, and a really great Fledge Watch team that has somehow been keeping track of them in skyscraper land, which is very difficult to do. So I'm so grateful to all of them.
A bit of a follow-up to that. How often do you see birds change nest sites year to year, or how often do they just stick at the same place over and over and over?
Yeah, so especially in sort of more wildland scenarios, it's really common for them to have multiple nests that they change from year to year to year within the territory. And we'll see that in urban areas, specifically places like bridges where there's a lot of options for them on the structure that are very similar. They'll move from site to site within the territory. And we're really lucky with our cam nests that they don't do that as much. I think it's just because these locations, there aren't as many obvious, equally good alternatives. I mean, you look at the Campanile, it's just sticking up high in the middle of all these other lower story buildings. So it just really is a prominent sort of monument for them. And then, yeah, so it's sort of a mystery why some of these birds stick to the same site. That's actually more unusual than the one, seeing them move around year to year between 2 or 3 or 4 sites.
Yeah, and so we're getting just about into an hour in, so I don't know how much time you're willing to hang out, Zika. But here's a good question that we should touch on before we leave, which is, can people volunteer for Fledge Watch? How do you get involved in that?
Yeah, so we do. I mean, most of our Fledge Watches are run by volunteers. And so I usually am putting you in touch with the volunteer in charge of those efforts. I know Falcons has a really great Fledge Watch group, and I'll let you guys talk more about that. But we do have Fledge Watches at a few of our nest sites in urban areas where we know it's relatively dangerous for them to fledge. They end up on the ground a lot. And they're in public areas where it's easy to have folks just turn up. And the one, as I mentioned, there's one in San Francisco that's going on right now. And then there's one starting in San Jose by the City Hall on the 13th of June. And that's a really great one for getting started. I'd say also the Campanile as well, where it's easy to see the nest and it's easy to kind of learn how to do Fledge Watches. And I'd really encourage y'all, if you're interested, to just show up at the 4th Street Garage at some point the week of June 13th in San Jose, right by City Hall. That's the kind of headquarters, and they can kind of introduce you to fledge watching, and maybe if you want to stick around, teach you how to be ground crew.
Yeah, and if you want to DM Cal Falcons on one of our social media channels, we can try to get you connected to the people in question to join in on the Fledge Watch. And someone here just wanted a quick recap at the end. So there was a female chick, had the yellow tape, and was egg number, we don't know which egg it was. We could tell a little bit, which eggs hatched because the third one laid was much darker than the others. So we know that darker egg is one of the ones that hatched. But we don't know egg number. Once the chicks are out, they're moving around too much. They look too similar. And then male chick was blue tape, but again, we don't know which egg either of the chicks were from. So we don't know which is the one possibly sired by Alden and which is the one that's definitely a young Grinnell.
Like Grinnell Jr. might.
Yeah. Let's see.
I think I will probably hop off in about 5 minutes.
Okay, and that seems good. That's probably we'll need to hop off too. Our son's getting a little antsy. But this is a good question. So where do you learn to ban birds? How do you get certified to ban birds? What kind of permitting is involved?
Yeah, so it's different for everyone. Everyone has a different pathway to this, but generally with bird banding, there's a sort of master apprentice style program to how you learn how to band. And I personally got my start working at a migratory raptor banding station, the Golden Gate Raptor Observatory, where they have a really great volunteer banding effort and great training program where you can get that kind of training. You can also get hired off on as staff or volunteer for another master bander to kind of learn those skills underneath someone who has a permit. Eventually, you can get enough experience to become sub-permittee under a master bander. And then finally, once you feel you have enough experience for specific species of birds, it's very rare that people can band all species of birds. You usually specialize in a certain genre of bird. Once you have enough experience, you can apply for your own master banding permit and become a trainer yourself in that way for the future banders.
Yeah, and it's notable when you apply for these permits, you not only need to prove you have the experience, but you need to prove that you have a valid reason to be conducting this kind of thing. You have a valid research or conservation reason to be banding.
Correct. Yeah, you have a proposal and you have a resume.
All right.
Did we cover this one?
Oh yeah. So Sequoia, a chick from 2 years ago, was spotted in San Jose. Is there a nest in that area? Are we monitoring that bird? I actually don't know what that bird's up to these days.
Yeah, so we've been following him. He seems to be with a mate for sure, hanging out in the Santa Clara area, but they did not successfully incubate any eggs this year. We don't know if they didn't try or they didn't have good substrate and the eggs just wouldn't stay put. But they don't appear to be showing any breeding behaviors at this point. So we think they're just bonded and kind of looking for a place to maybe nest in the future. But it was really exciting to find him again.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to maybe leave this off with this last question. Do you think this seems like a good question to leave off on?
Yeah.
All right. I feel like this is good info to close on. What do you do if you run into a chick on the ground that has trouble flying and, not just for raptors, but baby birds in general?
Yes.
Would you like me
So
to answer or Sean? Yeah, I feel like one of you would be good.
Sean can, I can.
yeah. So generally, if you find a baby bird, the unless it's in some sort of distress, it's usually best policy not to touch it or move it. If it's in a place where it shouldn't be, like in the middle of a sidewalk or a road or something, try to move it to a place that's safe and nearby, um, where the parents will be able to easily find it. Uh, but generally, so you can see some raptors and branching, I think, and
Yeah, and so this is true of most birds. When they're first learning to fly, they're not very good at it. And so they will end up, practicing flying and ending up various places. Uh, and the parents are watching them, the parents are still feeding them. And so often they're perfectly healthy, but still in a position that you as a human could go and pick them up because they haven't mastered flight yet. So if the bird seems fine, uninjured, and not in a place that's in immediate danger to it, you should leave it alone so the parent can continue caring for it. My sort of example, I worked for the Minnesota Raptor Center for a long time, and there was this great horned owl nest that was right in an urban park, and every year they'd have chicks that, would be doing their normal branching and moving around. And every year that one of the chicks would be brought in once or twice or three times because people thought they might be in distress. If you do find a bird that is actually in an unsafe situation or is indeed injured, there are wildlife rehab places all over the place, the local ones in the Bay Area. The one we work with Cal Falcons is Lindsay Wildlife in Walnut Creek. And Wild Care is another Bay Area one, but you can look them up and you can call them and they can advise as to what to do depending on the species you are seeing. But yeah, so shall we wrap this up, Zika? It has been absolutely wonderful to have you here and have, the person who did the banding and runs these studies here. Oh, there we just had a little projectile poop. But yeah, thanks so much, and we'll end it here. And I know we didn't get to all of our questions, but I think we got a pretty good subset of them.
and I just wanted to mention that the Santa Cruz Predatory Bird Research Group just does amazing work, and we're really, really lucky here in the Bay Area to have access to such amazing experts on peregrine falcon biology, and that people that do this extensive monitoring work, and so I just want everyone to be aware that the PBRG is an amazing organization that exists, and that they're definitely worth checking out.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Well,
Thank
you, everybody.
And thanks for banding our birds, Zika.
Yep.
My pleasure. It's always great working with you guys. I love what you do with your cam, and yeah, I think your outreach is just the gold standard. So it's fun to be a part of it.
Thanks. All right. Bye, everybody.